What is Nintendo's strategy and the strategy behind the Switch 2? I wanted to look at this in a little bit more detail because I think a lot of the analysis videos that I see on this center around Nintendo being greedy or Nintendo being lazy. And I think that you want to look at things in a little bit different of a way than just kind of bringing everything down into this kind of very simple terms of Nintendo is greedy or Nintendo is lazy. And I think that when you look at this question of what is the strategy behind the Switch 2, what is Nintendo's overall strategy, I think there's like two questions that you have to ask yourself. And the first one is, why is the launch title lineup so barren? And the second thing is, why is the Switch 2 basically just a continuation of the Nintendo Switch? And so I wanted to kind of try to tackle that second question first, which is, why is the Switch 2 a continuation of the Switch 1? And I think, to be honest with you, a large part of it is this waiting game, this kind of strategy where Nintendo really doesn't need to innovate. They don't really need to do anything new. And in a lot of ways, it makes sense just to kind of continue the success from the first Switch and just see what happens and kind of continue off of that success. Because when you look at their competitors, whether it's PC gaming, Microsoft with Game Pass and its console, or PlayStation, there is a different game being played and a level of uncertainty because Microsoft is really trying to make Game Pass work and change the dynamics that's affecting the industry. I think with Sony, there's an identity crisis and they're trying to figure out where their place is in the market. And then PC gaming is going through its own changes. And so when you kind of have this built-in market of loyal fans and kind of have this niche established, why change anything? And to be honest with you, when you look at a lot of game development right now, games are taking even longer to make. And there is this kind of flatlining of graphics overall. And honestly, in a lot of ways, innovation. And it's really uncertain right now what's going to be the next change or if there's going to be a change in the near future. Some people will talk about integrating AI concepts into video games or some sort of dynamic like that, but we've yet to really see that with any modern video games. And so if you're Nintendo, why really try to push that when you have a lot of success from the first Switch and you can continue that with the Switch 2? When you look at a lot of the titles that kind of really sell the Nintendo console, whether it's Mario, Zelda, Smash Brothers, or something akin to that, you really don't need the most powerful system to accomplish those objectives. And as long as you kind of upgrade the console a little bit to support a good amount of third-party titles, I think that keeps your customer base there pretty much to the point where you really don't need to have the most powerful console. I mean, if you think about someone that is going to purchase a Switch 2, right? They're probably mostly interested in the first-party Nintendo titles, right? The Marios, the Smash Brothers, the Zeldas of the world. And if they can get a couple of third-party games in there, that really kind of accomplishes their objectives with video games in the end of the day. And if you're like kind of a person that wants to play all the types of video games, you're probably already going to get a Switch 2 because you're playing on PC, you have a PlayStation 5, and so there's already that kind of market built into there. Because in a lot of ways, I just don't think that Nintendo is competing so directly with a Steam Deck. I mean, in some regards they are, but I think that for a lot of people that buy a Switch or a Switch 2, it's just kind of a similar market, but in so many ways, it's kind of not the same. So you kind of want to upgrade your console to kind of compete with that to support those third-party titles, but ultimately those first-party titles I think are getting people there in the first place. And the other thing too is that there's kind of all these geopolitical dynamics that are happening where you clearly see supply chain constraints happening in the market. You have uncertainty with global trade. And so with AI also kind of being a huge source of demand for GPUs and chips in general, it just seems like that could be a bottleneck for graphical or improvements within the video game industry, especially kind of these consoles at the higher end where you have AI really wanting the best chips out there or the materials to support that. And so if you kind of have a generation below that, it seems like maybe that isolates you from some of those pressures. Maybe not completely, but in a lot of ways, you don't need to have all of those kind of newest things because I think that future with the AI technology integrated into video games, the graphical improvements, new innovations is not super clear right now. And like I said, it goes back to that waiting game dynamic. Why try to take a risk by doing something very new, whether it's something like the Wii or the Nintendo 3DS or the Nintendo Switch, when you really don't have to. You don't need to kind of make this next leap. In so many ways, the Switch 2 kind of feels like a PS4 Pro or something like that. It's just continue what you're doing right now and just see what happens. And you're already doing quite a good job. I mean, and despite a lot of people being frustrated with Nintendo's kind of overall strategy behind its pricing, or maybe the laziness in some of its gaming, the sales kind of just show that that the Switch is popular. And I think it's popular for a lot of people. There's an established fan base. There's kind of a level of loyalty that doesn't really exist as much with some of the other consoles. And there's an identity there that I think brings strength to Nintendo, whether you like that or not. And I think that's just putting them in a very strong position where they don't really need to do anything crazy or innovative. And a lot of their games don't really need that. There's this really strong loyalty that honestly puts them in a really good position. And so then that brings me to the second question, which is why is the launch title lineup for Nintendo so barren? And I think a big reason for this is that Nintendo probably doesn't want to cannibalize sales from the Switch 1. I mean, it's got a huge established player base, and if you just release 10 or 20 new games, and you can only get them on the Switch 2, maybe people can't afford or go get a Switch 2 right now, and so it lowers the sale of those games by only making them available on the Switch 2. And so if you kind of gradually build that out and you slowly release new games that are only available on the Switch 2, more and more people will eventually get the Switch 2, and then people will also continue to buy the new games, but also you're still getting sales from the first Switch. So in a lot of ways, that makes a lot of sense. There's probably also a dynamic behind just the scalper dynamic and not getting too caught up in that, or some of the supply chain issues with building enough consoles, especially with the GPUs or the computer parts needed for this. But I think a lot of those things are supporting maybe why the Switch 2 lineup is a little weak right now. It's really not about making it this big affair. It's slowly upgrading that Switch, slowly offering titles over time to not cannibalize those sales from the first Switch, but also just slowly kind of build up the strength of the Switch 2 in general. And it really probably doesn't take long to achieve that, because think about it, you have Mario Kart World, and then you have a Donkey Kong game, and then you can easily see how you release, let's say, a Mario game, you release a JRPG, you release a Zelda game, and now the Switch 2 becomes a lot more attractive. So let's say you have 4 or 5 or 6 games, that's probably enough for people to go buy the console. And then once they have those 3 or 4 first-party titles, then people are incentivized to buy some of the third-party titles, and then it kind of just builds strength from there. I think that this kind of works for Nintendo versus like with the PlayStation 5, you kind of saw this strategy almost not work in a lot of ways, because for a lot of people, it's like, why would I go buy a PS5? Where are the first party titles? Why not just play this on PC, assuming I have a PC that can run a lot of games? And to be honest with you, it's a fair point. But with Nintendo, you have this kind of first party lineup. You have this strength that brings people to Nintendo. You get that Nintendo experience with a Zelda game, a Mario game. And those games, despite all of their flaws, have a level of quality to them, even though a lot of people complain about the new Mario Kart, or let's say they have their problems with the newer Zelda games or Mario games or whatever, there is a level of strength to that. And so there's no reason to make this huge launch title kind of strength where you have all these games, especially where this console in a lot of ways is just a refresh. There's nothing new here. There's nothing too crazy. If the Switch 2 kind of brought some sort of new dynamic to the video game industry, this kind of new technology or new way of thinking about things, then I think that having a strong lineup would make a lot of sense, because the only way to get that experience would be to get the new console, right? So when you look at this with previous console generations, you see like the PS2, the Xbox, people had never seen graphics quite like that. And outside of playing some PC games, you had to buy that console to get that experience. If you wanted the uniqueness of the Nintendo Wii, you had to go out and buy it. Or if you wanted the next kind of generation of portable console, you had to go out and buy it. And every generation's kind of had this level of innovation, especially from like a graphical fidelity perspective. And I think with like the PS5 generation, you didn't really see this huge innovation. I mean, there was an improvement, but not as big as say from a PlayStation 1 to a PlayStation 2. And so when you see something like a Switch 1 to a Switch 2, it's not this huge innovative leap. And so you don't really need to make this huge affair out of things. And the other thing too is that do not underestimate the first party lineup for Nintendo. I mean, these games have maintained relevancy for a really long time, and they've maintained their quality for a very long time. I struggle to think of too many game series or games in general that have maintained that level of relevancy and quality over time. You've seen this with so many game series that have kind of just fallen out of favor, whether it's a Halo or some series that seem to be losing it a little bit, like an Assassin's Creed. But Mario, Zelda, all these other kind of Nintendo franchises have maintained a level of relevancy, and that is a strength that Nintendo has, especially compared to Sony or Microsoft, where Sony seems to have lost that identity a little bit, and Microsoft kind of has something going on with Game Pass and trying to transition into something different. But that strength of just knowing what Nintendo is, I think, is really strong, especially from a competitive perspective in terms of selling consoles or kind of selling the lineup that it has. So that's kind of what I had to think about the Nintendo Switch 2. Honestly, I think that over time, it's going to be better and better. And despite all of its flaws and despite some of the flaws within the games themselves, I do think that Nintendo will continue to do well, and they'll put out good games, and there'll be games that appeal to a certain video game demographic. And I think that really this is just a wait and see game. This is a way for the Switch to kind of get a refresh and just wait and see what happens. And I think that it's probably more likely that the next console will be something more innovative. It'll be something very different, because I think that there could be dynamics that happen in the market that change the way that gaming goes, whether it's innovations in terms of gameplay mechanics or technology or something like that. And then that's kind of the moment that maybe Nintendo will try to do something different. But as it stands right now, it doesn't seem like they really need to do anything new.